Okay, now I've brought in my fabric. I'm going to use the last little bit that I have left over of this Mona Luna fabric. It's an organic cotton. I'm going to open that up. Okay, looks like all I have left is about a yard. You want to get used to looking at the direction of the print of your fabric. So for this one, this would be up and that would be down. So I would want to cut my pattern so that everything will be facing the right direction when I'm done. With this one, it's a rectangle, so you'll just have to make sure of the direction when you get to pressing and sewing. But other times your pattern has to be sewn a certain direction, so you always want to make sure that you're cutting it out the right way. So a lot of this is about getting into practice. Okay, I'm going to fold this over because my pattern is on the fold. I'm going to want this fold line to sit on the fold here. I'm going to get this as close as possible to my selvage because this is going to be cutting it pretty close with the width of the fabric. Regardless of the size of your skirt, you're going to want to cut this where the fold line runs along the length grain. That means parallel with the selvage of your fabric. So I could pin this in place and cut it with scissors, which is fine if that's what you have. Because this is all straight lines, I'm going to go ahead and cut mine with a rotary cutter. It's going to be faster and more accurate. Okay, there's one side. Now I'm going to take my fabric. I'm going to fold that over. And now I'll cut this side. So now I have a front piece and a back piece that were cut on fold. So when I open them up, they're a solid piece of fabric. I wanted to mention that I do recommend pre-washing and drying your fabrics in the same manner that you will wash and dry the final garment. That way there won't be any shrinkage surprises. So let's talk about the sewing, the machines and machine settings. So if you have a serger, you can do the side seams directly on the serger. You'll have to cut off 1/4 of an inch in order to stay accurate with the pattern. Or you can sew the side seams on a sewing machine and then finish them with a serger. If you don't have a serger, you have a couple of options. You can use pinking shears, which I don't have mine right here, but they're like a zigzag. You can cut the edge of the seam allowance off after you have sewn it. Or I'll show you a different method where you can enclose that seam allowance so it doesn't ravel. So the very first thing we're going to do is sew our 1/2 inch seams on both sides. Okay, we're at the sewing machine and we're going to use a straight stitch. In my case, I'm going to use, because I'm not going to use the serger for this, I'm going to switch this over to where it's a 1/4 inch from the edge of the presser foot. And I'll show you why I'm doing that. So I want to be able to enclose the seam allowance so that it doesn't ravel. Normally we would sew the fabric right sides together, sew it, and then finish that edge. But because we're going to enclose it, I'm actually going to do the opposite. And I'm going to sew it wrong sides together first. So the right side of the fabric is facing out. And I'm going to sew just under a 1/4 inch. So I'm not going to go right with the edge. I'm not going to go right with the edge of my presser foot. I'm going to come in a little bit so that I'm sewing between 1/8 and 1/4. So about 3/16 of an inch. I am going to do a little bit of a back stitch. Not much. Just to barely secure it. Okay, if you're not comfortable with just sewing without pins, feel free to pin it down. But with a straight edge like this especially, you can just go with it. Okay, so I have sewn a little under a 1/4 inch all the way down. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so that seam, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that to the ironing board and I'm going to press that seam open, and you'll see why in a second. Once I press that open, that makes it very easy for me to then turn it inside out. There's my seam. That makes it very easy for me to fold it accurately along that seam. Just like that. And I'm going to press that all the way down. All right, I have pressed that flat. I know that that seam is running right along that edge. So now what I can do is take this to the sewing machine and now use my full 1/4 inch to sew down that line. And the same on the other side. Okay, so what does that do? Well, when I open this up, you'll see that I have a nice clean seam on the outside and a beautifully finished seam allowance on the inside that will not unravel. So now what we're going to do is start folding and pressing our hem allowance for the bottom as well as the casing for the elastic. So remember, on our pattern, we're doing a 1/4 inch fold and then a 1 inch fold for our hem. One way to do the 1/4 inch fold is to mark a 1/2 inch up from the bottom all the way around and then fold to that 1/2 inch mark. Another way is to use a seam guide and just keep track of that 1/4 inch seam as you press. And yet another way is to use a little guide like this. I made this out of a manila folder, and I marked 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch. So what I can do there is place it and then fold up to my line. So I think I'm going to use that method. Okay, now that I've pressed up my 1/4 inch, then I need to press up an additional inch. If you want to, you can place pins. I'm just going to place pins at the side seams here where it doesn't want to stay folded down. Okay, and that is going to be my bottom hem. For the top, remember, we're doing a 1/2 inch fold first and then 1 3/8. Okay, so now I have folded the top part, which will case the elastic. I'm going to put a pin there too. And we've also ironed the bottom hem. Okay, for this top part, we're going to need to leave an opening, I would say about 5 inches, so that we can thread our elastic through and then pull it out there and close the loop of the elastic. So I'm actually going to put another pin about 5 inches away from that one. And that'll give me plenty of room to be able to work the elastic without trying to fight the fabric too much. And we are going back to the sewing machine now. All right, I'm going to put my machine back on just a regular straight stitch. And I'm going to sew this inside out. That way, I'm going to sew this inside out because why not? And that will allow me to watch the edge of that fold on the hem. And I just want to stitch about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge of that hem, because remember we only have a 1/4 inch allowance in there. All right, my hem is sewn now. Now I'm going to do the top. I get my side with the 2 pins that are 5 inches apart, and I'm going to sew from one pin all the way around to this pin and then back stitch and stop there. And we're going to leave this open. Again, I am sewing 1/8 of an inch down, or 1/8 of an inch up from that fold. Okay, I'm making it back to my pin now, so I'm going to back stitch. And that's done. Okay, I've sewn all the way around. I have this opening, and this is where I'm going to thread my elastic through. Okay, according to my worksheet, I needed an elastic 20 3/4 inches long, so that's what I've cut. This is a 1 inch wide elastic, and I'm going to use the safety pin method. It's not really the most efficient. There are actually elastic threaders. I don't have one of those, so I'm just going to use this method. Put a safety pin on one end, not all the way up close to the edge because then it might pull through, but about 3/8 of an inch in. And I'm going to go to that opening, and I'm going to start feeding it through. So I'm just going to kind of bunch the fabric on there and then pull at the pin, and it'll pull the elastic through. As we start getting to where the tail is getting pretty close to that the edge of that opening, I'm going to pin that to the casing so that it won't go in. Okay. We're getting close to the edge there, so I'm going to go ahead and just pin that just like that, so I won't lose the other end. I try to make sure that the elastic doesn't get twisted up in there. Once you get past about halfway, you'll start to notice that the fabric starts gathering on the elastic. So the reason we leave that 1 1/4 inch casing instead of just 1 inch is because if we had just 1 inch there, it would be very hard to feed through, and it would cause the elastic edges to rub. on the elastic, on the fabric, more so on the top here, and cause some abrasion. Okay, where I can pull the pin through. Okay, so now I have the two ends of the elastic. You will want to make sure that your elastic is not twisted up anywhere inside the casing, but that it's nice and flat. Okay, now that I've made sure of that, when we overlap these, make sure that one side is not twisted, but that it goes flat along with the rest of the elastic. We're going to overlap by 1 inch. I'm just going to set a pin in there just to hold it for now. I'm going to pull out as much as I comfortably can because I need to get this under the presser foot of the sewing machine. At this point, I'm going to use my zigzag stitch. I'm going to go up to a width of 1.6, 1.8, somewhere around there. I'll keep it at the 3.6 width. And I'm going to zigzag down this edge, over, up, and back. I'm going to do that twice. I don't know if you can see what I've got there so far. So that's what I did with the overlapping part. That way it's nice and secure. It won't pop on me. So I won't have to later open up this casing and stitch that back together. Now I'm just going to tug on the skirt. We've already put most of the gathering on the other side. So this should be nice and flat. If not, make it as flat as you can. We're going to go back to our straight stitch and we're going to finish sewing between these 2 points. Just join those together. Okay, now our elastic is enclosed. We can even out this gathering of the fabric Make sure it's about the same on the front and the back. One way you can tell if it's even is if when you hold it like this, the side seams are opposite each other right on the edge there. One is not kind of skewed one way or the other. All right. Now that I've done that, there's just one more step. I don't want this elastic to be able to twist inside of there. So I'm going to get my side seam right here. And I can see right where that seam goes right there. So I'm just going to stitch right inside of that seam to hold that elastic in place. Okay, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. Find that side seam. All right, now that's done on both sides. You can hardly see it because it's right in the seam. I'm going to trim my threads. And just like that, our skirt is done. Congratulations on completing this workshop. In the next one, we'll use the same base pattern. We're going to manipulate it a little bit to create the second elastic waistband skirt, which will be like the one behind me with the pockets on the side. And I'll walk you through the pattern adjustments as well as the sewing. Please subscribe to my channel to be notified when I post those new videos. Also, please visit my website to be able to shop for fabric and thread and your elastic, all the supplies that you'll need for your skirt. Thank you so much for following along, and I'd be happy to hear any feedback you have. You can contact me on the contact form on my website or send me an email at caldrea.collections@gmail.com.